So let's get cozy. Let's dive into your stories from the sweater weather so long.
Hey y'all, I'm Emily, an almost lifelong quilter with a lot of stories to tell. I have loved quilts and talking about them for as long as I can remember, and I'm here to celebrate the tradition of quilting with you. We'll celebrate quilts and the real people who made them, learn a little bit about the history of quilting, and have lots of fun exploring ways to reclaim tradition in a modern world. I'm so glad you're joining me this week here at Patchwork Revival.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Patchwork Revival Podcast. I'm your host, Emily. We're talking about our quilting community today. This is going to be part 2 of the sharing your stories as part of the Patchwork Revival community. Specifically, these are stories from the Sweater Weather Sampler Sew Along that I was part of hosting last year. Like I said in the first episode of the year, which was episode 21, I really had to lean into my virtual quilting community in 2025. And that was for a variety of reasons. But part of that meant that during the Sweater Weather Sew Along, we shared a couple of prompts on our community group, and it was basically just share your story. What got you into quilting? Why do you still quilt? Do you have stories about your quilts? What kind of a machine do you use? And we had some really fun stories. I had so much fun reading them, getting to know people. And so I felt like it would be a really cool thing to share with all of the Patchwork Revival listeners. Even if you're not aware of what sweater weather is, if you didn't participate, if you never want to, that's totally fine. But I just wanted to share these stories because this is my community. This was how I found connections through quilting last year, one of the many ways. And I want to invite you into that because I want to inspire you to find a way to create community around you. Sometimes that can mean putting yourself out there and joining people who are already doing something. Sometimes that can mean putting yourself out there and inviting people to come with you. Many of the stories that I read and that you all shared with me were very inspiring because it was a lot of, I learned a quote from so-and-so. So-and-so taught me what they know. A lot of people learned from YouTube, and that's really cool too. But I think what it really hammers home is that our knowledge is valuable. It can change people's lives for the better. Even if it's just finding a creative practice as a way to slow down, to process our life and all the things. Quilting means something different to every person. But usually the people who keep coming back because they love it, because it really helps them in whatever way it does. So grab something cozy, a quilt, a cup of coffee. I have a cup of coffee here and actually a really cute little quilty mug. Coffee is my comfort drink of choice. I drink way too much of it, I think, but whatever. So let's get cozy. Let's dive into your stories from the sweater weather so long. So Sandra shares her story. She says, I started quilting about 16 years ago when I took a mystery quilt class at our local quilt shop with a neighbor who is now a very good friend. See, funny how that happens. You quilt together and you become good friends. The teacher, now another good friend, also lived in our neighborhood. I had wanted to learn to quilt for some time after learning to sew clothing and dance costumes for my daughter. I had no idea I'd get so hooked. Okay, this is another common theme. You'll notice from episode 1, we had several people say, I caught the bug, I got hooked. So apparently quilting is very addicting. Proceed with caution. Sandra goes on, I've made quilts for my kids and many family members and friends over the years. I love making bags too and other small projects. My daughter just embroidered 20 blocks with wildflowers, and I sashed and stitched them together. It was so special to work on a project together that I hope will become a family heirloom. Quilting brings me joy, companionship, and a sense of peace when things get crazy. Me too, Sandra. I'm right there with you. I also would just love to see the combination of the embroidered quilt blocks that your daughter made, that you turned into a quilt. That's so cool because that is a family heirloom. And I think it's really awesome that when you have these sort of two interests that can combine to make a really cool project like embroidery and quilting, that's just really fun to see. So thanks for sharing your story. Oh, and before I forget, I want to invite any of our listeners out there. If you are a Patchwork Revival listener, doesn't matter how long you've been, I would love to share your story. If you want to share it with me, you can email it to hello@patchworkrevivalstudios.com. I will share it. I would actually love to do another episode similar to this later in the year, sort of compiling listener stories, because that's what this is all about, sharing stories and our connection that we have through quilting. So don't forget, share your story. Let's keep going. Kat says, I love listening to podcasts and audiobooks while I sew. Yours is now in the queue. Okay, well, Kat, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. Thanks for listening. Quilting has been on the periphery of my life, but only stepped into the spotlight for me in the last year. I'm a millennial. Hello, millennials. Welcome. Quilting is amazing. I'm glad you're here. I'm a millennial who grew up in a conservative religious homeschooling community. I learned a bunch of fiber arts like crochet, knitting, weaving, and sewing. Once I left that community, I rejected so much of what I grew up with, and I didn't sew again until I hit my 30s. The pandemic had me locked down with a friend who sewed and encouraged me to buy a secondhand sewing machine. I started with shirts and easy dress patterns. Kat, I'm just going to tell you that easy garment patterns to me sounds like an oxymoron. So congratulations on having a wonderful skill being able to sew garments. I would love to learn to do that. I pieced my first quilt top last fall due to an Instagram quilt along. As a 35-year-old mother to a 1.5-year-old boy, I was hooked. Okay, another person got hooked on quilting. Careful out there, guys. And immediately dove into another quilt project once that quilt along finished. The funny thing is, my godmother is a prolific quilter, and I have 2 quilts that she has made for me over the years in my home, one of which is now on my son's big boy bed. I joined the 2024 Sweater Weather Sampler right before the last week's block, but I didn't start on sewing the blocks until this summer. I knew I wanted to do the 2025 Sampler in real time. This year's sampler will be my 5th quilt top, and I'm so excited to be part of this community. We are so thankful that you are part of our Sew Along, Kat. My mother-in-law sews as well, and her mother-in-law sewed quilts for my husband, her grandson, which now covers the bed he sleeps in when he stays at her house. I love that because I, too, had a very specific bed with a very specific quilt on it at my grandmother's house, so it's a thing. It's safe to say, even though I'm still a new quilter, my life has been wrapped up in quilts for a long time and continues to surprise me with quilt connections. Absolutely. Quilt connections are the best connections. Thanks for sharing your story, Kat. Holly says, my mother taught me to quilt starting in middle school. Though she was abusive and I was often ridiculed in our sewing times, I've overcome my fear of imperfection because all crafting has helped me overcome and get through hard times. Absolutely. I think a lot of us can at least relate to that part of your story, Holly, where we can release our fear of imperfection and sort of work on processing hard times, hard things. Making lovely objects during times of stress has increased my daily joy and helped me see through to know good times are coming as well. Now, with my kids getting older and seeing how much the world could use love, I want to spread beauty and soft quilt hugs. I love this community. It's such a fun way to bring people together and share the joy. Holly, thank you so much for such an encouraging comment and story. Thanks for being part of our quilting community. I hope that you are continuing to enjoy the process of making quilts. Ooh, this is one of my favorites. This is a story from Kendall. I remember Kendall sewed along with us last year and, 2 years ago now, my gosh, time, in 2024. And now she's here in 2025. And she says, I tried teaching myself to quilt when I was about 12 or 13. I used to go to the library and get books about knitting, sewing, beadwork, recipes, anything crafty I could get my hands on. I figured out knitting by myself pretty easily and thought quilting would be easy to pick up. I didn't have many tools at all and missed a lot of important early steps that made the piecing process really frustrating. Ooh, I think a lot of us can relate to that, Kendall. I joined an around the world quilting bee and got some good practice then, but I would be embarrassed to see my blocks now. Those ladies in the quilting bee were so patient and encouraging, but I cringe to think of what my blocks looked like in their quilt tops with their far more professional blocks. I eventually got discouraged and set it aside as school and work took over. Shortly after the birth of my second son in 2021, two ladies at my church invited all the younger moms to come to their quilting shop and learn the basics with their guidance. They were three next door neighbors to each other that sew in a finished garage. It's a dream. Okay, that actually is literally one of my dreams, Kendall. So thanks for just keeping that in my mind. Cabinetry stuffed full of fabrics, a massive cutting table with rulers of every size, a long arm quilting machine, a fancy embroidery machine, sewing tables, ironing tables, and three women with decades of experience willing to share everything in their different areas of expertise and passion. The quilting world opened up to me, fully decided by their willingness to share and teach. Y'all, write that down, take a note. That is literally why I started the podcast, because I am so done with gatekeeping or keeping information and things to myself. Hard work deserves pay, but skills that can change people's life and the way that these women shared it with Kendall is so special. And I think is such a fabulous example of how we can just open up doors for so many people doing the things we love. Kendall goes on to say, the frustrations I had disappeared as they explained how to correctly cut fabric, how to pin and iron, how to nest seams, and more foundational learning that I was floundering without. I would not have this creative outlet in my life if not for their invitation and investment. Thank you, Miss Connie, Miss Cindy, and Miss Betty. Your friendship has changed my life. That is so sweet. And Kendall, I really hope that you get to continue to quilt with all of your friends, Connie, Cindy, and Miss Betty, because it sounds like they're a really special part of your life and your quilting journey. Kendall says, I mostly sew at home now, fitting it in where I can with the baby's naps and house chores. It's done in snippets throughout my day, and even if it's just 1 minute, it's a minute to pause and recharge a little bit. Every day I do chores that are usually just immediately undone and need doing again tomorrow. Sometimes seams need to be ripped, but for the most part, quilting is steady progress, even if it is slow. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Kendall. That is such a just rich story and example of how we can invest in others and how that investment can just take on a life of its own. Thanks for being part of our sewing community and for sharing your story, Kendall. All right. Kathy. Kathy is a woman of few words, but probably many actions, short and sweet. She shares, I sew in a Bernina and most of the time do edge-to-edge embroidery for my quilting. That is so cool. I have actually heard of people doing this. I probably have seen a quilt that was finished with edge-to-edge embroidery, but I haven't known it. So I would love to hear about that. I would love to see some of that. I'm going to look that up, actually. Kathy, if you feel like sending me a picture of some of your finished quilts with edge-to-edge embroidery, send me a photo at hello@patchworkrevivalstudios.com because I would love to see that. That is a really cool idea. Christy says, my mom and I took a quilting class back when my daughter was 2 in 1991 at our local Ben Franklin store. We learned how to make templates out of cardstock, hand piece, and hand quilt. My mom kept at it, but I gave up. Fast forward to 2009, we went to a quilt show and I bought a kit and used my $49 brother machine from Walmart to learn to quilt. I've since upgraded to a Baby Lock Soprano. And then Christy shares a recent creation, and it's a beautiful quilt. Amazing. Thanks for sharing, Christy. Shannon says, my mom and grandma quilted when I was growing up. I made one quilt as a child, a 4-patch out of wonky squares. My grandmother had cut it from every kind of fabric imaginable. I haven't quilted since until 2 years ago, I made a few blocks for church, then I found Quilt Scouts and decided to go for it. So, Shannon, I love that you gave Quilt Scouts a shout out. Megan Fowler of the Nine Patch Quilt Collective started Quilt Scouts last year, maybe the year before. It's been going strong for a while now, and seeing how many people just love being part of that community, who have just loved jumping in and learning things alongside Megan as a Quilt Scout has been so cool. And another really cool thing to know is that Megan started the Quilt Scouts podcast this year. So definitely tune into that. Quilt Scouts, it's open for membership, and I would highly encourage people to jump in there like Shannon mentioned. I hope you're loving Quilt Scouts, Shannon. Thanks for listening to Patchwork Revival Podcast, and thanks for being part of our quilt community. Elizabeth says, I've sewn my whole life, hand sewing Barbie clothes as a young girl, then taking home ec and learning more skills. My first quilt was for my daughter's doll many years ago. I really got into quilting about 12 years ago. I'm really glad that you quilted with us for the sew along, Elizabeth. Thanks for sharing your story. Kathleen shares, my mother desired to make quilts for each of her grandchildren. When she moved in with me after surviving cancer, we were going to get started on wedding quilts. However, through a series of unfortunate events, she developed lymphedema, so it was put aside for another battle. Wow, it's a lot to go through. When the first grandchild was getting married after my mother's passing, my twin sister called me and asked if we were going to make a quilt, to which I said I had not planned to do since I didn't even have a sewing machine. I had sent her mine when Mom's machine died. She said she had seen this thing called a jelly roll race and was going to make it. A few months later, she said it was done, but it was 50 by 120, and she did not know what to do. Could she send it up? So my hubby bought me a machine, and I started taking classes at a local quilt shop. I finished the quilt in time for the wedding. 2 thoughts while falling in love with quilting. Number 1, how did my mother ever make all our clothes and work full-time, and why was I ungrateful when I would find a pin left? Kathleen, we grow older and we grow a little bit wiser, don't we? I know my mother is looking down from heaven, smiling that all her girls sew now. I totally agree with that visual, Kathleen. I just love imagining people getting to see how their knowledge got passed on and how it got used by the people they shared it with. Thanks for sharing your story. That's a lot to go through, but I'm glad there are some happy memories from that time. Kathy says, my mom's influence on my love for sewing and quilting can't be overstated. She taught me to sew at 7 and quilting at 21 in 1983, before rotary cutters and rulers were invented. I've been making quilts ever since. My first quilt that holds a special place in my heart is a hand-pieced, hand-quilted quilt I've been working on for years, 41 to be exact. It's my oldest UFO. It's made with the beautiful, popular colors of the 80s, mauve, pink, and maroon. And then Kathy put a little giggling emoji in. And actually, I have to say, these days people are becoming very into nostalgia and these like maximalist kind of color palettes and things. So I don't know, maybe the pendulum is swinging back to mauve and maroon. We'll see. I have made hundreds of quilts since I started. I love to challenge myself with a new project, a new technique, using colors that are out of my wheelhouse. I have a best friend that owns a long arm, and she is patiently teaching me how to use it so I can make my own quilts. There are probably 40 that need to be quilted. I'm excited to make the sweater weather sampler and learn some new techniques and make new friends. That is such a great story, Kathy. Thank you for sharing. You sound like an adventurous quilter that might also enjoy Quilt Scouts. Thank you for sewing with us during sweater weather, and thank you for being part of our community. Christy shares with us, I learned to hand quilt at church when I first started quilting. I have quilted on my personal sewing machine, but now I take it to a long arm quilter. I have made t-shirt quilts when my kids were in high school. I love quilting. I love quilting too. I have made quilts for close family friends fighting cancer. These are special memories for me. I love that, Christy. I have made some quilts during times that I knew were difficult for people or to sort of commemorate those times. I'm thinking specifically of a time that I made a quilt for my um, friend's daughter, and it was made to commemorate and so sort of honor her dad's service to our country. He was deployed for about 9 months during her first year of life. And I cannot imagine having to go through that as a new daddy. And I know that his daughter probably won't remember that, but she deserves to know that her father did that for her. And I just couldn't find the words to say thank you, even though they're some of our best friends. So I made her a quilt. And let me tell you, I got a text message the other day that that quilt is still on her bed. And it is very important to her that it is on the top of her bed because you just have to see the whole thing. She loves it that much and warms my heart. So quilting is definitely a love language. Christy, thanks for sharing your story. Let's keep going. Jody says, I first learned to make placemats at a semi-annual quilting retreat at my local community hall when I was in elementary, maybe grade 5 in 1999. I think we might be close to the same age, Jody. I think we are. She has a picture. It is so cute. She says, I'm the one in the purple overalls and a headband. Yeah, we are definitely close to the same age because I remember overalls in 5th and 6th grade were the epitome of fashion. Can we take ourselves back to 1999? Because I'm all about overalls. Fast forward to 2015, I moved back to my hometown and started quilting at that same quilting retreat at the same hall. Oh, that's so cool. Now there's a group of ladies and I that meet monthly. I'm the youngest by about 30 years, but it's awesome. My grandmother was a big quilter and she originally got me into it. Okay, Jody, I think we basically have lived parallel lives. I love that you shared your very first quilting project. I love that you have photographic evidence of it. It is so cool. I hope you're still enjoying quilting and getting to meet with your group of ladies in your hometown. That's so cool. Jewel says, I made my first quilt in 2011 when I took a class at a local technical college. I had always wanted to learn. My granny, my dad's mom, was a quilter. Unfortunately, I was never able to learn from her because she lived in Tennessee and I lived in Wisconsin, and then she passed. Since then, I have been mostly learning from YouTube. I took a long hiatus from quilting while I went to NP school and picked it back up in 2021 to decrease stress from work. I totally relate to that. Another healthcare worker using quilting to de-stress. It's all too common of a story. Really glad we have quilting to get hooked on and to reduce our stress instead of some other more questionable choices. Jules says, one of these days I will finish my quilt tops, but the quilting part and the binding intimidate me. Jewel, you can totally do it. You are a nurse practitioner. You survive the healthcare system of our country. So please, you can definitely quilt and bind these projects. She says, I am going to get over that with this year's sweater weather quilt. Yes, I hope you did, Jewel. Here is a picture of my first table runner. It is really cute. And look, you can totally finish that. That's a great project to go and practice quilting and binding. I really hope that you dove in and got your quilts bound and quilted and ready to use, because that's the best part of quilting is curling up in your finished quilt. Christine says, I learned to sew from my mom. She made quilts and clothes when I was growing up and had been sewing since her teens, if not before. All of us cousins sewed with my grandma growing up too. I started doing more quilting with my mom when we started doing friends and family baby quilts for my cousins, and then a chuppah for my best friend's wedding. Then in 2020, during COVID, I started doing masks, then got into quilting for myself with my mom's guidance and aunt's support. Now I quilt for donation quilt tops for the most part and my own mental health. That's so awesome, Christine. Thank you for sharing. This is another prompt for me to sort of look more into donation quilts and quilts. for a cause. So thanks for sharing, Christine. So Brianne shares, I started quilting after reading The Christmas Quilt by Jennifer Chiaverini in December of 2023, all because I loved the memories evoked from the main character of that book and her family's history with quilting. The Elm Creek quilting books by Jennifer Chiaverini are so good. It's a series, and I'm not sure. Maybe she has some kind of outstanding books that are outside of the series, but I have read those books. I read all of them that I could get my hands on several years ago, probably like 6 to 10 years ago. Time kind of blurs together, but I'm sure there have been more published since then. I highly recommend those books. And actually, I'm really glad you mentioned those, Brianne, because I probably need to jump into some of those. So Brianne goes on to tell us, I honestly despised sewing when I was younger, and I would always ask my mom to finish up any sewing projects I couldn't or didn't want to do. But after reading that book, I decided I was going to make 2 Christmas quilts for nieces and a nephew, and told myself I wanted to make sure I did the majority of the sewing. I ended up doing it all. After that, I was hooked. Hooked again, guys. Quilting is a type of therapy for me and a way I get to wrap others in my love. Brianne, that's such a beautiful way to describe quilting and why you love to quilt. Thank you for being part of our sewing community, and thanks for sharing your story with us. All right. Bohana shares, Bohana, I am so sorry. I hope I said that right. If not, I just apologize from the depths of my heart. But Bohana shares, I think I made my first quilt in 2008, learning from Nancy Zeman and her PBS show. Man, I loved sewing with Nancy. I have not seen that show in many, many years, but I kind of wish that I kind of want to go watch it now. I'm sure it's archived, even though I know Nancy passed, and that just makes me so sad. But okay, so while my daughters were tiny, I made many placemats, table runners, and other smaller projects, even ventured into sewing simple dresses for them. During COVID, I started spending more time crafting, and my daughters were old enough to learn to crochet and knit, so I was super happy that I got to share that love with them and teach them. Now they are both avid crocheters at 14 and 16 years old and have by far surpassed my abilities for sure. In the meantime, I became obsessed with quilting. I think that's pretty accurate to say. Just this past Sunday, I upgraded my sewing machine from a Singer Quantum 9960 to a Baby Lock Ballad, and I'm so excited for tomorrow. I used to quilt all my quilts on a straight stitch Singer S16, which is a great machine, but I'm looking forward to doing it on the Baby Lock now. My most recent favorite quilt is the Jelly Roll Hearts I made for my mom, and she shares a picture of it. It is so pretty. Thanks for letting us share our stories. I love this group, and I hope you keep the sampler going forever. My gosh, I love this group too, and I hope we keep the sampler going forever. Thank you, Bohana, for sharing your story. Okay, last one for today is from Renee. Renee says, I love reading everyone's stories and journey through quilting. Like many of you, I come from a long line of sewists and quilters. I learned to sew when I was young, and my mom gave me quilting tips when I made my first quilt in 1996 for my then boyfriend and now husband. Why I ever decided he would be the lucky recipient of my first quilt as a boyfriend, I still don't know, but he's a keeper. Yes, I am so glad that he stuck around because he sounds as though he was quilt worthy for sure, Renee. I have a Viking lily that's around 25 years old. However, I almost exclusively sew on my mom's Bernina 1020 from the 80s. The older machines are just so much better. I know that a lot of people have that opinion, and I have heard it's because a lot of the parts were made with metal instead of plastic, and then they also don't have the computerization kind of layer of complication. So that is a common opinion, Renee. Thanks for sharing that. Renee says, I also have a vintage Viking that I plan to rehab one of these years. And I recently came across a 50s featherweight at our local Habitat for Humanity. What a cool find. I still like my Lily best for piecing though, because I know exactly where that 1/4 inch is. I quilt on my domestic and send out the big ones that are too bulky to manhandle through the impossibly small throat space on these domestics. Seriously, who designed these machines? Good question. I wondered the same thing. So I have been quilting on and off for 30 years. I took a hiatus when the kids were young and didn't have time. I did do some teaching and design work back in the early 2000s when we lived in Texas. I think this is why I so often rewrite patterns to my preference. What got me back into quilting in 2019 was my niece asking if I would teach her so she could make her wedding quilt. Now my husband jokingly wishes I had never gotten back into it because his idea for the man cave in the basement became my sewing studio again. Sadly, my mom has Alzheimer's and can no longer quilt, but she loves seeing my projects and even more loves that her 21-year-old granddaughter is also using her old Bernina. The Z generation loves their, quote, granny crafts. Yes, they do. And I'm going to tell you, the millennials do too, folks. This is my quilt from last year. It's currently being quilted, and Renee shares a picture of her beautiful 2024 sweater weather sampler quilt top. Thanks for sharing, Renee. I'm so sorry to hear about your mom, but it makes me really happy to know that you guys can still connect on that level where you can share her quilting projects and share her love of sewing with you and her granddaughter. That's it, guys. I've shared all of the stories from the 2025 sweater weather sampler. And again, I just want you guys to know that I shared them to hopefully give you a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of motivation to get out there, to find your quilting community, to find your people, to create a community. Because something simple like quilting can just really open up doors and really open up space for people to express themselves, to get through stressful times, and just to have fun, because that's important. Remember that if you want to share your story with me, you can send it in to the email hello@patchworkrevivalstudios.com. I'm going to drop that in the show notes for easy access because sometimes clicking a link is just easier. Remember to follow the show so that you never miss an episode. If you have time, like or leave a review, I would appreciate it. That's how the podcast gets shared and shown to other people. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time on the Patchwork Revival Podcast.
Well, that's it for this episode of Patchwork Revival. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rave review. Also, be sure to jump down to the show notes to find links for this episode, as well as the link to my shop where you can enjoy 15% off as a podcast listener with code REVIVAL. Remember that the Patchwork Revival Podcast is here to celebrate the connection made in the quilts we love. I'll see you next time.